It's so good to see all of you here today and to have a reunion of sorts. It's wonderful. Glad to be here and glad to share with you today. Providence is an interesting word. It has more than one definition. One that I read was God or nature providing spiritual care. I'm not sure about that nature business in providing spiritual care, but maybe some see something in that I'm missing. Some words that are near synonyms to providence are prudence and foresight or forethought, but I think the best definition I've run across is this: timely preparation for eventualities, for future eventualities, or timely preparation for future events, to make it simple. And I think the story of Joseph is one of the best examples of God's providence. Joseph himself is one of the greatest characters in history, I believe. His biography in Scripture is electrifying. It's been of interest to millions of people for 3,000 years. As a child, I remember so well my mother reading the story of Joseph to me from Hurlbut's storybook of the Bible, or reading it directly from the King James text, sometimes just retelling the story to me when I was very little. I loved it then, I thrilled at it then, and I'm still thrilled when I read the story of Joseph. It still captures my attention. I believe that wise people have studied this story carefully all through the years, and they've been encouraged to be righteous, to be faithful by reading the story of Joseph. Now, in the Old Testament, there's more space given to telling the story of Joseph than to any other narrative except that of Abraham. Did you ever think about this? Did you ever wonder why? Surely it's not just to entertain people, even though the story is very entertaining. There must be a better purpose than that, and I think it's intended to teach us some valuable lessons for life. One of the greatest of these lessons is the providence of God. It's not just a story. It is actual history, which relates God's timely preparation for future events. Am I doing something wrong here? What's that noise? Okay. So in just a few minutes, let's try to see this lesson of providence in the account of the life of Joseph. I thought about naming it Joseph in Reverse, because that's really the way we're going to be looking at the story today. In the book of Genesis, we read the prediction that God made to Abraham, Joseph's great-grandfather. Here's the prediction: know that for certain, for 400 years, your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own, and they will be enslaved and mistreated there. But I will punish the nation they serve as slaves, and afterward they will come out with great possessions. Genesis 15:13 and 14. Even though Abraham didn't know it at the time, the foreign land where his people were to become slaves was the land of Egypt. A transfer of his descendants, therefore, was necessary for the Lord's statement to come true. Abraham lived and died in the land of Canaan, and his grandson Jacob lived in Canaan and never dreamed of living in Egypt until the day when his sons came and said to him, "Joseph is alive, and the ruler of all Egypt." And the invitation was extended to Jacob and his family to come and live in Egypt. That invitation was from Joseph and from the Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, and the invitation was accepted. But what actually brought about this migration to Egypt? Well, Joseph was the governor of Egypt, and he wanted his father and his family to be with him. That's true. But how did Joseph happen to be the governor of Egypt? Well, that was because he prophesied 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine, and proposed that someone be chosen to prepare for the years of famine to come. Pharaoh had the good sense to appoint Joseph to that job. But wait, how did Joseph so accurately predict the famine? Well, that was through the interpretation of the king's dreams. But how did Joseph happen to interpret those dreams? All of the kings and wise men had failed to do it, and that's exactly the reason that Joseph was called on to do it. But how, even then, did Joseph happen to be called on? If the king's butler had not forgotten a promise that he made to Joseph 2 years earlier to speak to the king about having Joseph released from prison, Joseph might have been released, finishing out his term, and could have even left the country. So you see, even the forgetfulness of that butler is a link in the chain. When the wise men failed to interpret the dreams, the butler said, I remember my fault. He told about Joseph in the interpretation of dreams of the butler and the baker while they were in prison. So the king sent for him. But wait a minute, how did Joseph happen to interpret the dreams of the butler and the baker in the first place? Well, that depended on several things. Number one, they're having the dreams. Number two, having them while they were in prison. Number three, Joseph overseeing them, the prisoners, and noticing that they were sad one day and asking them why. But how did Joseph happen to be in charge of all the other prisoners? Well, that was because he had behaved so well as a prisoner himself that he was put in charge of the others. But then how did he happen to be in prison in the first place? Well, the wife of Potiphar had made a false accusation against him. But how did it happen that she had the opportunity to bring that false charge against him? Well, that was because Joseph had gained the confidence of his master as a young slave, and the master had put him in charge of everything he owned. That gave the opportunity to that immoral woman. Well, then, we ask now, how did Joseph happen to be a slave there? Well, Potiphar bought him. Evidently in need of a houseboy, he went to the slave market and purchased Joseph. But how did Joseph happen to be a slave in the slave market, ready to be sold? Well, that was because his brothers had sold him into slavery. Think about it for a moment. Suppose Joseph had never been sold into Egypt. Would he have interpreted those dreams? Of course not. Would he have become governor of Egypt? No. Would he have sent for his father and brothers to come there? I think not. No, you see, we must go back even further. Continue looking in reverse at the great story of Joseph. We must ask now how the brothers of Joseph happened to sell him as a slave. I'll tell you something. If the traders, the Ishmaelite, Midianite traders, had been an hour later, it wouldn't have happened. Reuben had planned to take his brother out of the dry well in which his brothers had placed him and send him home to his father. So it all depended on the timing, didn't it? But then how did Joseph happen to be in that cistern? His brothers had seen him coming and remembered his dreams and said, look, here comes that dreamer. Let's kill him and throw him into a pit. But they didn't. They didn't kill him. They did throw him in the pit, but they didn't kill him. Why? Because Reuben, the oldest brother, persuaded them not to. Now, it was their jealousy that had caused them to throw him into the pit. But why were they so jealous of him? Well, partly because of his dreams that had indicated that they would one day bow down to him, and partly because of his coat of many colors with which his father had favored him, showed partiality to Joseph. So, you see, we've traced the story back until we find at least a part of the cause of all of it, the partiality that Jacob showed to Joseph. And you know, the history of many family troubles running sometimes through generations can be traced to jealousy springing from parental partiality. But every one of these so-called causes that I've mentioned stands as a link in the chain by which God, having determined that these Hebrews should dwell in Egypt for 400 years, and brought them down there where he wanted them to be. So let's think about some of the links in this chain for just a moment. Some of them are wicked deeds. Some of them are good deeds. The faithfulness of Joseph, of course, is the great thing in the chain. Sold as a slave, he evidently adopted the attitude, I'll be the best slave I can possibly be. And then put into prison, he kept the same attitude. I'll be the best prisoner that I know how to be. And he became a model prisoner. How we wish that all young men today would have that attitude. Joseph's life shows us that a young man who has character and unfailing faithfulness and a little degree of work ability cannot be kept down. Put him down, he'll come up again like a cork in water. Wouldn't it be wonderful, though, if all young men and all young women had such integrity and such power to resist temptation, such resolve and determination, such perseverance and faithfulness to God as this young Jewish lad? All of us should learn that lesson from the life of Joseph. I believe that the account of the life of Joseph is so told in detail in the Old Testament, as I've said, as an illustration of the providence of God, by which he can bring about his purpose in the lives of men and women. Through this chain of events, God caused his people to be brought down to Egypt just as effectively as if he had just wrought a great miracle and scooped up Jacob and his family, 75 people in all, and just set them down in Egypt. It was an effective way to get them there. He didn't wrought that one big miracle. Providentially, he guided. You see, anyone who reads this narrative and doesn't see the guiding hand of God in it has just missed the point entirely. And what is true in the family of Jacob may also be true in regard to our own families today. We need to recognize that God can overcome and overrule our own acts, both good and bad, and the acts of our friends and our associates, and blend them all together to the accomplishment of his will. And while we're thinking about Joseph and the providence of God, I want to consider another question. Why didn't Joseph go back home to see his father and his mother after he got out of prison? There were 9 years, as I count them, where he could have gone home any time if he had chosen to. But he didn't choose to do that. Why? Why? I think when we see the answer to this question, we'll see another valuable lesson of the providence, the timely preparation for future events. To understand the motives of people, we need to put ourselves, or at least try to put ourselves in their places and try to imagine how we might have felt and acted. Suppose then that you're 17 years old and your brothers are away from home with their flocks of sheep, and your dad sends you out to check on them, maybe to bring them news, maybe to bring them some supplies or goodies. So you go to look for them, and they're not where you expected them to be. And a stranger, while you're looking for them, tells you where they are, and so you go on until you see them in the distance. And you expect to see them, to be glad to see them, and for them to be glad to see you. Maybe to bring news to them from home. But on what you see is disturbing. You see a frown on every face. Instead of welcoming you, they seize you and take away your coat from you and drag you to the mouth of an old dry well. They drop you down in there, and then you hear them say, now let's see what happens to him. How do you think you would feel if you were in that circumstance? How do you think Joseph felt? I don't know, maybe he thought they were playing a bad trick on him. Maybe he thought, surely they won't leave me here. They won't let me die in this well. But finally they did come back, and he may have thought the joke was over, but he's drawn up out of the well, and he sees a bunch of strangers, people from way back east of there. And he hears them talk about selling him to these people. Then they tie his hands, and off he goes as a slave going toward Egypt. How do you think he felt then? That this was some kind of a practical joke? Maybe he thought, they'll come and buy me back and tell me to keep my dreams to myself from now on. But they didn't come. The night goes by. A week goes by. And they travel further and further from his home. Finally, he becomes understanding. He realizes that he really is a slave, that he's being taken to a foreign country, and that he may never see his father or his brothers or his home again. Who can even imagine his feelings at this point? He was brought to Egypt, sold to Potiphar. Now it may be that Joseph had one thought to encourage him, for a little while at least. This thought, my father loves me. I know he does, and he's a rich man. When he learns what happened to me, he will leave no stone unturned until he comes and finds me and buys me back. I trust my father. I believe he will deliver me. But weeks and then months pass, then years pass. 13 long years of darkness and sorrow, and he never heard from his father. Not a word or a hint that his father sent for him or tried to find him. How do you suppose he felt about his father then and his brothers then? Would he have wanted to see those brothers again? Maybe he thought he might have even been wrong about his father's love. That maybe his dad just didn't care enough to look for him and try to find him. Would he have wanted to see the father if that was the case? One glimpse is given us as to how he felt. One little clue. When he got out of prison, became the governor of Egypt. And when he married, he had a son. And when that son was born, he named him Manasseh, which means forgetfulness. Because he said, God has enabled me to forget my father's house. Remembering home and family was so painful to him that he just wanted to forget it all, forget them all. But then, as governor, everything went well for Joseph. His circumstances became better than he would ever have imagined. He had a wife, he had children, he lacked nothing that he needed. He was a good, godly man, well respected by the Pharaoh of Egypt and by the people apparently over whom he ruled. And then one day, a servant came in to tell him that there were 10 foreigners who had come to buy grain. He'd made a rule. Joseph himself had made a rule that all of the foreigners had to come before him. So they were brought in to him. And there were his brothers. There were his brothers. And they all bowed down to him in fulfillment of the prophecies, of the promises, the prophecies of his early dreams. Now, of course, they didn't recognize him. He didn't look like their little brother, Joseph. It must have been something as a shock for Joseph to see them. It seems that he immediately determined to test them, to see if they were still the kind of man that he had known them to be. So he said, "You're spies. You come to spy out our land. But they responded to him, telling him that they've just come to buy food. They said, we're all sons of one man in Canaan. We are 12 brothers. The youngest is with their father, and one is no more. That remark about the youngest son seemed to awaken a new thought in Joseph. Perhaps it brought back the hour in which his own mother died, giving birth to Benjamin, his only full brother. Maybe it reminded him that Benjamin was at home with his father when his brothers sold him, and that his little brother had no part in their evil schemes and their evil deeds. It seems that he decided that Benjamin should be brought to Egypt to be with him. So he said to them, send one of you to bring your brother here to prove that you're what you're saying and that you're not spies. Then to let them think about it for a little while, he put them in prison for 3 days. Brought them out then, and he told them, I fear God. If you're telling the truth, then let one of you stay here in prison, and the rest of you take food home and bring your youngest brother to me. Then I'll know that you're truthful, that you're not spies. When he said this, they began to talk among themselves in their own language, which they didn't know Joseph could understand. He understood every word they spoke to them in Hebrew or Aramaic or whatever it was. But he understood it, and Reuben said something that brought a revelation to Joseph. Didn't I tell you not to sin against that boy, that lad? Didn't I tell you? But you wouldn't listen. Joseph learned for the first time that Reuben had befriended him. And it so touched his heart that he had to go to another room and wash his face, dry his tears. Then he passed by Reuben and took the next brother, Simeon, to keep in jail. 9 brothers went home. And time went by. Perhaps more than Joseph had expected. But of course he had no understanding, no realization that it was because of Jacob's unwillingness to let Benjamin go to Egypt. But finally, word comes to Joseph that 10 Canaanites have returned. They were brought to him. And there was Benjamin, his little brother, the baby of the family, Joseph's only full brother. The heart of Joseph is so touched that he went to another room to cry. His plan seemed to be nearing its completion, to have Benjamin with him and not the others. So they were sold the grain they needed, and early in the morning they started for home, all of them, Benjamin included. But Joseph had instructed one of his servants to put Joseph's cup in Benjamin's grain sack. They'd not gone very far when the servant caught up with them and accused them of being thieves. They denied it, of course. But he said, one of you have stolen my master's cup. No, they couldn't believe that. Then the servant said, I'll search you, and the one who has my master's cup will be my slave, and the rest of you can go right on home. To their amazement, the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. How did they feel then? The servant started back with Benjamin, but the rest of the brothers didn't go home. They followed that servant and Benjamin. And when they came again before Joseph and bowed down, and they all bowed down again and said, we are your servants. God has found out our sin. Joseph said, no, only the one who has taken my cup. The rest of you can go in peace to your father. But then Judah got up, the 4th son of Jacob, and asked to speak privately with Joseph. He reminded him of the incidents of their first visit, and he told him of the difficulty of getting their father to let Benjamin come to Egypt with them. He quoted from their father these words, you know that my wife bore me 2 sons, One of them went out from me, and I said, surely he has been torn to pieces, and I've not seen him since. If you take this one also, and something happens to him, I'll just die. Judah then closed with this proposal: let me be your slave, and let the lad go home to his father. Now this brought some real revelations to Joseph. First, he realized that he may have been blaming his father for 22 years for not coming to find him in Egypt and get him and redeem him and take him back home. But he now knew that his father had been deceived into thinking that he was dead. What self-reproach. Another thing came to light for him. He'd been trying to drive his brothers away, but now he saw that a change had come over them. The very men who had sold him as a slave were now willing to be slaves rather than to let that happen to Benjamin. What a change. Immediately his love for family was revived. He broke into tears and said, I am Joseph, your brother. He had a little trouble convincing him that that was true. But then a thought came to him that evidently had never occurred to him before. He said to his brothers, do not be angry with yourselves for what you did to me, for it was not you who sent me here, it was God. Then Joseph could see, for the first time, I suppose, the hand of God in it all. He didn't see it when his brothers put him in a pit. He didn't see it when he became a slave. He didn't see it when he became a prisoner. But finally he came to the point where he could look back over it all and see God, that God had been guiding it all the time. Remember the definition of providence. God had been preparing in a timely way for future events. What a thrill it is to recognize the wonderful providence of God. Dear ones, many times you pass through difficulties, have troubles, trials, painful situations, trouble with family, all kinds of things that can almost overwhelm you. When you feel that people have deserted you, but if you will wait a little while, trusting God, you may be able to look back over it all and see the hand of God, the providence of God, working out some plan, something wonderful for your life that you had never dreamed of. It may be, for example, that the difficulties of your life have served to bring you to repentance from your sins. And if so, the kind Redeemer whom you had been rejecting and sold, as it were, to strangers, stands ready to forgive you more completely and more perfectly than Joseph forgave his brothers. God knows your life. God knows your sins. But Jesus died for you so that you may be forgiven and restored to the Father. I don't know what's in the heart of every person here this morning. Maybe someone here has never obeyed the gospel of Jesus Christ. If that's the case, we certainly encourage you to do so, and do so immediately. Now I know that all of us, all of you, I'm sure, can look back over your life and see where God's hand has been guiding your events. Wow. Bob, you could tell some stories about that, couldn't you? All of us can. It's amazing to look back and think about this happening and this happening and this happening, and then to recognize that they didn't just happen. God was guiding. May we all recognize his guiding hand and be responsive to it. It's our message for this morning. If there's anything we could do for you in helping you to be right with God in your heart,